Cool. Hi, everyone that's joined the webinar. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes just to wait for everyone to get registered, and then we'll kick off in a couple of minutes. All right, so it looks like we have quite a few attendees now. So, yeah, I'll kick things off. So, welcome to our latest webinar, hosted by Joe Knowles, who is a principal UX consultant here at No Mensa. Joe's presenting today on the Stoic Designer. So, this talk introduces Stoicism as a concept and aims to put personal and professional development into that framework. Joe's going to draw on case studies from his own career and life and force a rethink of some common design challenges, and provide a framework that will hopefully apply far wider than UX design. Before I hand over to Joe, if you have any issues with audio or video during this, just chuck a comment in the chat box, and if you have any questions, then please use the Q&A function on the Zoom webinar, and we'll make sure all your questions are answered at the end. So yeah, I will now hand over to Joe, and hope you'll enjoy.
Thanks, Henry. So in 2016, my life was in a bit of a mess. It was a time of great change. I had separated from my wife of 8 years. I was living in a shared house for the first time since I was a student. My ex-wife had moved about 200 miles away with my 18-month-old daughter, and work was really trying. I mean, work was really trying, but someone gave me some advice that I shouldn't leave because there was just too much going on, and that turned out to be very good advice. Work was trying because they understood very little about UX, about accessibility, and about getting things done, really. I was on a project that had been going on for well over a year, and I was just really angry with the situation. And I should clarify that I'm not talking about where I work now. This was back when I was a UX architect at a logistics company. And it was one of those places that has a dress code. So you have dress down Fridays as if that's going to have some sort of impact on the work that you do. And that was kind of reflected in the leadership and in the culture. And there was a lot of great people there. There was a lot of good things about the place. My team members, certainly my head of, really nice people, really competent. It was just the system and the culture that wasn't very good. And also the fact that I just wasn't dealing with anything very well. I was dealing with everything with emotion. I had no framework to deal with all the things that were going on in my life. How do you deal with all those things? People talked to me about self-care, which was a concept I understood, but I hadn't heard the term. Exercise, good food, surrounding yourself with positive people, etc. But it was the thoughts that I really struggled to deal with. Just so many thoughts. And then my brother gave me this. And this is, as it says on the cover, a daily Stoic journal. So every week has a theme, and then within that theme, within that week, there is a question for every day. There's a little bit of space for a morning reflection, a little bit of space for an evening reflection. This was my introduction to Stoicism. So some of the examples of the questions are, how will I respond to the things that happen today? Is more money really going to make things better? What sources of unrest can I tune out? And it might sound a little bit corny, but if you know anything about cognitive behavioral therapy, that's an intervention that aims to improve mental health, focusing on challenging and changing unhelpful cognitive distortions and behaviors. You can't make those changes over the course of a week or 2 weeks. You just hammer away at these themes, and over time, things start to change, and your thinking and your mind starts to change. So what is Stoicism? So it was founded in Athens by Zeno of Citium in the early 4th century BC. There are modern Stoics, but I just want to talk through some of the founding fathers. So the first is this man. This is Seneca the Younger. He was around just before the birth of Christ to just after. He was a tutor and later an advisor to the Emperor Nero, who died in Rome when Nero ordered him to kill himself. It was good of him. The next one is Epictetus. I was pronounced this Epictetus before, but I saw a video on it. I'm pretty sure it's Epictetus. He was around a little bit later. He was born a slave in modern day Turkey, and then he moved to Rome before living in Greece. And then there's the one I think that most people would have heard of, if any. This is Marcus Aurelius. He was around 121 to 180 AD. He was the Roman Emperor for the last 19 years of his life. And he was seen as the last emperor of the Pax Romana, which was an age of relative peace and stability for the empire. He had 13 children and was married to his cousin. But I think the thing that's worth highlighting is, I think, the difference between Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, because Epictetus was a slave and Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor. You couldn't get that, they're on polar opposites. And considering they're the founding fathers really of this philosophy, you can consider it the great leveler. It highlights how it's more about making the most of what you've got, not sort of complaining or focusing overly on the cards that you've been dealt. And in a lot of ways, Marcus Aurelius had it a lot harder in terms of stoicism, because he had a huge amount to overcome in terms of temptation, because it was all around him. So the Roman Empire at that point would have been from England to Egypt. He could have, he could have had sex with anyone or anything that he wanted. He could have killed anyone or anything that he wanted. He could have spent all his time on a chaise lounge, getting fed grapes, but he didn't. He chose to instead try and be the best sort of person that he could. He wrote a book actually called Meditations, which is this. It's not a traditional book. It's a series of notes he basically wrote to himself. And in this video that I was watching the other day that was really interesting, I hadn't thought about it before, was that he kind of wrote it to himself, because he was so out on a level that no one else was in terms of who he was, and the fact that he was living in a certain way as a Stoic. He was actually quite lonely, and so he ended up writing this thing to himself, and he wanted to get it burnt after he died, but no one would let him because he was too great for that. So all three of them saw a lot of waste and vowed to live life to the fullest to make the most of themselves. Stoicism has been popular since about 2012, and there's a bit of a resurgence. There are modern Stoics. There are people around who practice it and preach it a little bit. More famous people that are more recent, though, than people who are so old that they don't have photos. Roosevelt was one, so he was a president for 12 years, from the Great Depression through to World War II. He had a debilitating illness, meaning he couldn't walk, he could barely stand. Margaret Thatcher, politics aside, she had to deal with quite a lot. UK Prime Minister in the 80s, so strikes, Falklands War, lots of adversity. Viktor Frankl as well, he survived Auschwitz. And what Stoicism does is it asserts that virtue is the only good, and that judgment should be based on behaviour rather than words, that we don't control and can't rely on external events, only ourselves and our responses. And within that, it's got a few central teachings: how unpredictable the world can be, how brief our moment of life is, how to be steadfast and strong and in control, and that our dissatisfaction lies in our dependency on reflexes rather than logic. It doesn't concern itself with complicated theories about the world, but with helping us overcome destructive emotions and act on what can be acted upon. So it's built for action, it's built for practice, not endless debate. It's not just about theorizing and thinking, but trying to get better, to try and be the best version of yourself. And within it, there are 4 key virtues. There's wisdom, which is the ability to think and act using knowledge, experience, understanding, common sense, and insight. Courage, also termed fortitude, forbearance, strength, endurance, and the ability to confront fear, uncertainty, and intimidation. Temperance or prudence, the ability to discern the appropriate course of action to be taken in a given situation at the appropriate time. And justice. And how much do you wish, looking at that list, that every leader, in design or otherwise, displayed those characteristics more? But the thing is that it's really hard. And what I'm going to do now is just go into a couple of themes, or 3 themes that I've got, just to see Stoicism in practice, or not in practice, as the case may be. So in March 2017, I was at work and a BA walked over to me, and my heart sank. And not because I dislike BAs by any stretch of the imagination, nor did I dislike him. He was very nice. But the problem was I knew why he'd want to talk to me. We'd been working on the same project, the one I mentioned before, that had been going on well over a year. And all we were doing at that point was changing wireframes. And it was just infuriating. Doing research was difficult to do at the time. So we were getting buffeted around by opinions quite a lot. And I was consequently just reacting to everything with emotion. And my one-to-ones, I was just apoplectic, fear about everything that was going on. And looking back, I think the diagnosis of that is that it was in my head, because we don't control many of the things that we pursue in life, yet we become angry, sad, hurt, scared, or jealous when we don't get them. And it's those emotions, they're about the only thing that we do control. And it's the difference between responding with reflection versus reacting. I don't know if anyone's read a book called The Chimp Paradox, that, we all have this part of our brain that's been around for, thousands of years, that we're kind of fighting against because it doesn't really suit how we live now. It's that part. I mean, I didn't go as far as sort of standing on tables and throwing feces at anyone, but I wasn't that far off. And it was that part of my brain that was kind of overruling everything else. And I was becoming part of the problem and not part of the solution. And what I should have been doing really is taking the time to accept what I couldn't control. I couldn't really control that things were changing back and forth every week, but I should have accepted that more. And then I should have looked for happiness or some value in the other parts of my job that I was doing. So the second theme, so earlier than that, in August 2016, I was lucky enough to run some research in China. We needed to talk to exporters who, China's a big exporter. The problem that we had was around language and the fact that we don't speak the same one. So the site they were using was in English. So they said that they could speak English, and culturally there was a lot of value in that. The problem was that, as we then discovered, was that it was because they knew where things were on the UI. So they said, oh, you can speak English, but it didn't turn up quite like that. So we ended up being late to all of our sessions, which isn't a good thing to be. The sessions all took much longer than they should have done because we were relying much more heavily on translation. And also the numbers of people who turned up was not what we were expecting. So we were turning up expecting one-to-one usability sessions, and then there'd be like 8 people there, which is quite the pivot. And so this theme is about what can go wrong might. So there's the understanding and exploration of culture and understanding how people are different, but we come undone when exploring and trying to find answers, which we have to accept when we're trying to seek the truth. So we need to be open, or open ourselves in 2 ways. So not be so insular around what we think or what we know, so to not be so ethnocentric, and to make mistakes to get closer to the truth. So there's the 2 aspects there that we really failed on. I think there was a bit of a planning issue, and we didn't think enough about what could go wrong. But also, I don't think we were open enough to the differences there being in culture, and we came a bit unstuck as a result of that. But failure is the steps that we climb. So this is the premeditation of evil. So musing on the worst case scenario in order to calm and focus, to be prepared to act in the proper way and not react. Epictetus, he imagined losing a loved one every time he kissed them, which I wouldn't recommend that. I think you're either going to be put off the idea of kissing people, or you're going to not enjoy the experience when you do. But it is really difficult to do in general. But if we can open our minds up to change for the better, then great. Because if we don't, we're accepting our current position, and we're closing our mind off to change, exacerbating the problem, closing ourselves off to the truth. And that's what we're after. My third theme begins with absolutism. So this is the holding of absolute principles in political, philosophical, theological matters. And in that, I think we need to include UX. So a couple of years ago, I was in a pitch team where several things went wrong, mostly me. We were demoing some designs, which is a good way of showing what we can do with the brand and articulating some of our UX thinking. And there was a number of things that weren't quite right. The chemistry wasn't quite right. We got some difficult questions. But then we got a question, which is, what do you think of the use of carousels? So I was like, right, I'm in now. I was like, there's a great opportunity for me to sort of say something that I feel confident about. So I was like, no, we don't use carousels. they demonstrate a lack of priority. No one looks past the first one. After the meeting, we went for a bit of a debrief and had a beer, and the designer pointed out to me they actually had carousels on the designs that we were demoing. So yeah, I didn't get that very well done. I was indulging in the very easy to do and tempting form of absolutism. So you hear this all the time, like lorem ipsum should never be used. The only important thing in UI is content. And the fact is that with all of these things, it depends. So lorem ipsum, you can use lorem ipsum if that's what your organization expects and they're comfortable with that and they understand it, and you want to demonstrate something very early, and you're looking at layouts and things like that. And of course, content is really important on a UI. No one's saying it's not, but at the same time, if you hide it behind loads of terrible interactions, then it's not the only important thing. There's a bit of a balance. And it's the same thing with carousels. I think, you can use them if you're demonstrating imagery and things like that, which is what we were doing. And I was too quick to offer an opinion to try and demonstrate my amazing intellect. I would have been better off listening, I think, and offering some balance. I would have been better off doing that, listening before we even got in there. Because anything that results in listening to others and adapting is really beneficial. We've got a loud culture and people try and be louder in return. And we're taught to have an opinion about everything. And yeah, sometimes you do have to have an opinion. You have to be the person that speaks, but not all the time. And it ties into the point around searching for the truth and being open to it as well. So I made mistakes that kind of shielded me from the truth, which was my mistake. So to sort of piece this together a little bit, this is a bit of an introductory talk. I'm no real expert on Stoicism. I've been looking at it and practicing it and reading about it for a few years. I hope that everyone can become a little bit more Stoic, because I think that there's a little bit of value in it for everyone, even if you only take a few bits and pieces from it. If it got anyone out of a hole, like it did with me, then that would be great. And I think the reason I've sort of wanted to pursue it to this point is because it's the talk that I really could have done with seeing 5 years ago. So in order to make it a bit more practical, I've kind of come up with 5 things that I try and do on a day-to-day basis. So the first one is accept what I can't change. So this is the most liberating and empowering thing I think you can do. I'm not perfect at it, but it's the first thing that I try and go to. It's liberating when you consider the fact that you can't change the past. So that means you have to accept your misfortune, because once it's happened and you can't do anything about it. Sounds really simple and really obvious, but actually, how often do you spend your time thinking about the things that you've done and feeling anxious and not being able to sleep? I think when it comes to designing as well, and when you're building a service or a product, it's really useful to know what you can change and what you can't, because that means then you can focus on the bits of the experience that you can really change. If there's some legal aspect or something, or there's a team that's looking at something, you can't change it, then that's good, because that means that you can then focus your efforts on the other bits of it. The second one is to reduce want. So the ideal world doesn't exist. Life is messy. Design is messy. I was in a team a few years ago where the UX team wanted to build a new website from scratch to run alongside the current one and then switch over, and which was because there was a few problems with the current website. So there's this idea that we spent a lot of time talking about building, but it was just it was ridiculous, because we were never actually going to be able to do that. So spending our time thinking about and wanting something that was never going to happen, I don't think helped us move forward and helped us actually get on with our challenges. It's also a big thing here for just in general life, reducing wants, because part of it is that if you're constantly wanting other things and you're constantly looking for upgrades all the time, you're not really appreciating what you've already got. And that's a real shame, I think, if you're constantly looking for the next thing, because you'll never be satisfied, because once you've got the next thing, you'll want the thing after that. And it just becomes a constant case of just chasing and chasing. The third one is to get a little better every day. So again, I think this is something that people don't, I mean, it sounds really obvious, but people don't necessarily accept. I mean, time seems to fly anyway, but if you think about the fact that your organization might have particular gaps, skill gaps, potentially, you might have gaps on your CV that you want to change. Well, if you pick some of those things up, if you identify what they were, and you spent a little bit of time doing something on it every day, 3 months will fly by. Before you know it, you've got a skill that's really valuable, or you're offering something as an organization that perhaps no one else is as well. So there's a huge amount of value in that. Fourth one is what can go wrong might. So I touched on this with the theme. There's a real balance here between another principle in Stoicism, which is saying no to future misery. So if you think about public speaking, for example, there's a huge amount of preparation that can go into that, thinking about what can go wrong, especially when you've got things like technology in play. And you can think about all the various aspects of, there's a million things that could go wrong. The doorbell could go off right now. Anything could go wrong. But then you don't want to get yourself to a point where you're just obsessing about what can go wrong and feeling really anxious about it. So I think it's important to try and deal with those things. If you're doing research, etc., try and think about all the different things that can go wrong, deal with them, and then put them to one side, because you can't actually change it. So even if I recognize that the doorbell might go off and I've hidden it because it's this really cheap thing that just makes this horrible noise, I've hidden it, it might still go off, but there's nothing I can do about it now. I'm as prepared as I can be. The fifth one, is practicing silence. So I touched on this with the theme as well. I don't really want to be kind of this man sort of wading in, talking over people's knowledge or my opinion, because if I'm talking, then I'm not listening. And if I'm not listening, then I'm not learning. I think it's a really key sort of leadership point as well, which is to not be so loud and to actually let other people's voices come up and listen a little bit more. So how do I do all of the above? So there's some great things to do, right, to think about. But the thing is, how I do them is through journaling and reflection, and that's a really, really key part of Stoicism. So there's the journal that I mentioned at the beginning. I only did that for a year. This really fit in with my life anyway, because I found that I was doing reflection, but I wasn't doing it with any structure. So it was kind of just like a terrible diary. But reflecting is really good because it means you can stop and think about your own behaviors. And once you start to recognize your own behaviors, then you can start to make changes, and you can start to pick apart your habits a little bit and think about how you can change them. Right now is a good time to start because there's obviously a huge amount going on. These older guys though, like Seneca, Epictetus, Aurelius, for them it was war and violence all the time. Life expectancy was far lower than now. Infant mortality was through the roof. Viktor Frankl's, survived Auschwitz. And what I think is, in 2 years' time, what are we going to think about the situation as it is now? Globally, governmentally, we've got little say, but locally, individually, I think we've got lots of say. It's largely up to us. And I think for any individual, it will differ how much control you have over what's going on in your life. But I still think there's a huge amount of small stuff that we sweat that actually is well within our control and that we can start to really change. And if we can recognize what the things are that we can change at work, at home, in any given situation, then we can really focus on changing the things that really matter and stop worrying so much about the bigger things that are going on. So for example, with the news, which is, constantly ratcheting up and always will be, and in 2 years it might not be the pandemic anymore, but it'll be something else, and that will just continue to go on. Now I can't change that, but what I can do is I can stop reading the news. I can stop spending my time doing that entirely. I can reconfigure all of my feeds and the websites I visit so that I'm exposing myself to a lot more positive things. Or maybe there's bits in the news that I can try and uncover and actually try and affect locally, sort of, that's well within my remit. Because the other way I think about it is, what's the opposite? So I could have stayed at my logistics company, being angry about every time the BA walked over to me and I had to make a wireframe change. I can plan my next research project and not think about what can go wrong, not think about culture or, all the different logistics that can go wrong. And I can definitely indulge in absolutism, pick a side, have a fight about it. But where's any of that going to get me? Or I fight for something that I can change, something for my users, something for my colleagues, friends, family, something for me. I left working in the logistics company because I felt there was nothing more I could do to change it if I stayed. I got a new job. Is it perfect? Of course it's not. Am I perfect? No. But Stoicism isn't like getting ripped. You know, you don't sort of do it for a bit and then go and show it off. It's an ongoing practice. When I came up with the title of this, it wasn't because I was thinking that I am the Stoic Designer and I'm going to go and show off this great Stoic Designer that I am. It was far more aspirational than that. And it may well be that through years of practice, I never get perfect at it. I don't consider myself a very good Stoic, to be honest. I'm pretty sure my girlfriend would agree with that, given some of the things that I come out with. But I think it's important to be aspirational and to keep practicing and keep trying to work on these things. So my hope is that it helps you become a better designer, a better collaborator, have a better understanding and also a better appreciation of the ups and downs of your organization. And the takeaway to that, I guess, is you could go to a huge number of talks. There's always talks going on about, and they tend to be around things like hard skills. So, like jobs to be done, working in a design sprint, service mapping, things like that. And it's all really, really good. But I think if you want to be a designer, a good one, then you really need to start at home, and you need to be designerly about yourself. And I didn't want to sound preachy with any of this. So we've seen people throughout the pandemic, especially, and you see them on LinkedIn long before that, they become brilliant people when everyone else is really struggling. And it's just really annoying to see. And in no way am I a picture of perfection at all, but I'm sharing something that I hope has helped me that might help other people. If you don't like that, possibly because the word designly doesn't exist, or you don't want to become it, my alternative takeaway is that Marcus Aurelius had 13 children with his cousin, so you can always remember that. But he also said this: waste no more time arguing what a good person should be one. And that's me done.
Cool. Thank you so much for that, Joe. That was super interesting. I mean, I know. I'll certainly be investing a lot of time in kind of accepting what I cannot change. So we've got builders right outside the window.
You can't change that.
We've got a couple of questions. Anyone want to post their questions in the Q&A box? Apologies again for the builders that are outside the window. Thomas has, it's not a question, but a comment. Joe, I'm not sure if you want to add to this, but this point, practice silence is particularly tough to implement in practice, especially in our profession where we are perceived as experts and often have the urge or feel pressured to express an opinion and not to say, I don't know. Have you got anything to add to that, Joe?
I think, I totally recognize that urge and that pressure to have an opinion. I think we shouldn't be scared of saying I don't know, though. And I think there's probably going to be a question here where I'm going to have to say it, and then I'm going to have to go away and find the answer. And I think that, if you're in a situation where you're not quite sure, I know this is tough, but I think it's better to say, you know what, I'm not actually sure. I'm going to go away and find out, rather than what I've seen quite a lot is just people start talking and they fill the silence with something because they feel like they really have to, and give an opinion on something that doesn't necessarily help. But yeah, I totally recognize that in certain situations it's really difficult.
Cool, thank you very much for that. We've got another question. How should we approach UX design as a result of our predecessors in the 1200s? It's an interesting one for you, Joe.
Say it again.
It's from Abdul. How should we approach UX design as a result of our predecessors in the 1200s?
As a result of them?
Yeah. How should we approach UX design as a result of our predecessors in the 1200s?
I don't know necessarily about is there a specific reason why the 1200s before I attempt an answer at this?
I'm not sure if Abdul wants to add to that in the Q&A, and then perhaps we can get back to that. with a bit more context.
Okay, but I think I can attempt an answer based on history rather than specifically the 1200s, given that it's really important to know. And I think what happens quite often in UX design is that, so forget about the 1200s and think about 12 o'clock a week ago. People get really carried away and redesign or start thinking of solutions for things that for problems that have kind of already been solved. And I think there's a bit of a lack of history, and it kind of happens a little bit generationally, where people come in and think that they're the first to come across the problem, and instead of spending time trying to understand who else might have solved that problem, what they did, and maybe they've got insights and data you can learn from, kind of just going at the problem again. If the 1200 is more related to the stoicism side of it, then I think approaching UX design with some of the things that I've mentioned before is really, really useful in terms of what you can control versus what you can't control. I think that helps to, first of all, deal with a lot of the emotion. The other thing about getting a little better every day, if you think about that not within a skill, but if you think about that as being within a project, then you start off and you may be doing a bit of a discovery. You don't really know everything, but over time and every day you keep chipping away at that knowledge, and you essentially get a little better every day in terms of your understanding of your users, in terms of your stakeholders, etc., until you're building up until you get to a problem, a solution space that makes more sense.
Cool, thanks, Joe. Abdul, I hope that answers your question. So we have another question here from Kuntal. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. How would stoicism help to get over imposter syndrome that most of designers go through?
Oh, that's a good question. So you can tell if it's the same person was the one that sent me the video that I talked about a few times. So imposter syndrome is when you get in, you feel like you don't deserve to be there for whatever reason. I think that is really difficult, and that I don't know actually, and I might swerve that one because I'd quite like to think about it a little bit more, because yeah, I don't have an answer to it. So there you go. That's my I don't know in action. But it's a really good question, and it's worth reflecting on.
Brilliant. Well, welcome to. If you want to follow Joe on Twitter, I'm sure you can pester him for.
Well, you can ping me on LinkedIn, and we'll try and work it out and then post something.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Joe. So the next question from Sam Fitzpatrick. I love reducing my own expectations, and I'm definitely happier for it. What can UXers do to lower clients' expectations too?
What can clients do to reduce? What can we do to reduce clients' expectations? I think a lot of this is to do with being upfront and being transparent. So I think if at the very beginning you're upfront about what they're going to get, and you're transparent, you show them things that they might get, you show them things, because a lot of the issue around expectation setting is to do with communication. So they believe through one means or another that they're going to get something which then turns out to be a bit of a disappointment. And this is something that I've experienced on projects I've been on before, where I think you need to be really, really clear about what you're delivering when, and setting expectations like that. So in terms of timings, and then saying, when we deliver this thing on such and such a date, it's going to be of this fidelity. It's going to specifically solve this thing, and then delivering on that. I think that's the only way that you can start to reduce their expectations, by telling them that that's what they're going to get. Over time, there'll be a trust will build up. and expectations might change as a result. But yeah, I think it's about communication. That would be my answer to that. It's a good, really good question again.
Cool, thank you, Joe. So the next question we have, I'm currently a third year student at Ravensbourne University, and how could I best explain Stoic design to my classmates?
I started off with a very small introductory deck to Stoicism. This was a year ago. I delivered to our UX team, which just there are bits of it in this. I basically talked a little bit about the virtues, and I talked a little bit about the characters, because I think the characters are quite interesting, because they bring it to life a little bit, because there's loads of little details about their life which is quite memorable. So I might start with a bit of an introduction along those lines to get people to start thinking in that way. I think it's really difficult you can't make other people more stoic, because they need to start to take the time to reflect on their own behaviors, and it's not something you should worry about too much anyway. You're the main bulk of your effort should really be on yourself and trying to be the best that you can be. Through that, you might get people to change their behaviors. But yeah, I would start with something quite general. Ryan Holiday he's written quite a few books. This is one of them, The Ancient Art of Turning Adversity to Advantage. So if you're in any kind of book sharing situation, then these are really easy to use, really easy to read. They're not long, and there's loads of great stuff in there. And you can also take Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and there are loads of little nuggets in there. You can probably do it through social as well. But in terms of how you sort of turn it into design, the Stoicism and the design bit, yeah, I think that's the bit of the gap, which is what I was trying to fill with this talk. So it may just be putting something together yourself and delivering it to the group, or just becoming the Stoic design yourself, and then giving people advice and talking to people about it. They'll be interested.
Awesome, thanks, Joe. That's some solid advice there. So the next question from Lorraine Weaver. So hi, Joe. It's not a question, but it was great to hear from you. I haven't done previous readings on Stoicism, but many of my lessons learned from my career run parallel to yours. Particularly the job I had after we did our masters, I would become very passionate about things I saw as solutions and get very frustrated when my opinion was not selected as the solution. It took me a lot of reflection to get to the point that I would express my opinion, but then let go when the decisions were not in my hands. Have you got anything to add to that, Joe?
No, hi Laurie. It's really good that you joined. I think it's something as well that I think there's a bit of a rite of passage as well. I think that initially when I first put this together, I was thinking this would be for people who are junior to mid-weight, because I think that's where a lot of the frustration sits in this kind of thing, especially when you get to kind of you've been in the job for sort of 4 or 5 years. You're starting to get more confidence in your solutions, but at the same time, you've not got to a point where you appreciate that you're still precious about them, and so when people don't accept them, you kind of feel slighted. But yeah, really good to hear from you.
Awesome. Cheers, Joe, and cheers, Lorraine. So the next question we have is from Zoe May. Hi, Zoe. Would love to just let go of what I can't control. As a control freak myself, I think it would benefit my work, my brain, and my entire life. But how do you actually do this in practice?
Well, it's really hard, isn't it? And I think it's the word that you said at the end. It's practice. It's not going to be easy to do. It's not going to be something you do overnight either. And I think this is where the reflection comes into it, about spending time thinking about specifically what you're really getting bothered about. What are the things that you can control and the things you can't? On a day-to-day basis, if you're in a project and you're getting irritated about things that are happening, if you can write that down and really just reflect on the fact, okay, I can't do anything about that, I can't do anything about that, you could write out in lists. And I think over time hopefully you'll start to let go of that list that you can't do anything about and start to focus your efforts more on the other side of things. I don't think it comes easy. I don't think if someone's got a real problem and you just turn around to them and say, look, just, you can't control, it's out of your control, let it go. They don't go, oh yeah, no, you're right, thanks. And then that's it. It takes quite a lot of work, I think, to get to that point. And I see it even, after 4 years or so now, I see it in parts of my life where I'm better at it, but there's still parts when I'm shocking at it. So I think it's, practically speaking, it's about reflecting and just continuing to be aware of it and to keep working on it.
Awesome, thanks very much. The next question we've got is from Anonymous. Can you elaborate more on the importance of Stoicism in UX and how you implement it in your day-to-day tasks? I mean, that sounds like something we'd rope you into a blog post for, actually. So,
yeah, so
I'll let you answer now anyway.
So how I use Stoicism in my day-to-day UX work. That's it, yeah?
Yes, yeah. Can you elaborate more on the importance of Stoicism in UX and how you implement it in your day-to-day tasks?
Yeah, I think actually stepping outside of UX, it's not really about that. I know it is for us, but actually I think it's just something that should be in your day-to-day life and whatever job you're doing. I think because the reason I say that is because the importance and all of the good things about it are quite broad, in that, if you're practicing it, then you're hopefully happier and you're more productive because you're not stressing and complaining about things that you can't change. You're continuously thinking about getting better every day. You're reducing some of the wants that we're all tempted by in design from time to time, like, oh, if only this was different and I could do this. So I think the importance of it is that if you keep working at it over time, is that you'll just be a better practitioner of it. And then hopefully what will come out of that is that you'll be a better person, you'll be a happier, more productive practitioner as a result.
Awesome. Next question from Steve Edwards. Hi Joe, it strikes me that Stoicism and the 5 points you made might make a good parenting model. Do you actively apply the principles in your relationships?
I mean, yeah, they do. I think the reason is because, as I say, you can apply them to anything. So yeah, you can definitely apply them to your relationships. I mean, it can be quite annoying if you're in a relationship with someone, you're having a bit of a moan about something, and then you pipe up with, oh, I'm not that bothered. They're like, what? You start to seem a bit sort of dead inside because you haven't got any emotion. But yeah, definitely. And I think there's one of the really attractive things about it is that, today it's been sort of applied to UX and design, but actually the applications are really, really broad, and you can take it and apply it to anything. I think when you're dealing with relationships, especially forgetting about children, with adults who aren't necessarily into Stoicism, then yeah, you need to be a little bit sort of a little bit careful, because actually the expectation is that everyone's going to react with emotion, and if you tell someone something about the news, then you're expected to be outraged, and if you're then not, people can think you might be a bit strange, but you got to ask yourself whether that matters too much anyway, if you're happier as a result.
Cool. Cheers for that question, Steve. Next one here from Owen Purvis. Have you noticed the relationships you have with your colleagues changing since you started practicing Stoicism? and how have they changed?
Have I noticed the relationships changing? I think I've noticed it's a difficult one to answer on the basis that so much has changed in the last 6 months that it's difficult to have a gauge on it, simply because I've seen one colleague in the flesh since the beginning of March. I think what I've noticed though primarily is that from my side, it's been a lot smoother. So I think I've become a lot more tolerant of other people and their foibles and their humanness and their the fact that they've got a million things going on and they get on with it. I think I've become a little bit better with that. I've also been a little bit better at letting go of the things that are up to other people and not so much up to me. So yeah, I think generally speaking, the relationships I would say with colleagues it's probably been more positive, simply because of my approach changing slightly.
Cool, thank you very much. So the next question, as a designer, we tend to be a perfectionist, which sometimes hurts us when things don't happen the way we wanted, which can then demotivate us. How does Stoicism handle this situation?
So the idea of being a perfectionist and situations not going the way that you wanted them. Well, I think that the one thing to bear in mind around perfection is that your idea of it might not be the same as someone else's, and you're going to have to accept that might be out of your control. In terms of how else, yeah, I'm not sure. I think this might be another one that I want to take away a little bit. Who is this, Henry?
That was Knowles. Sorry if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, get Joe on LinkedIn or Twitter, and
well, it was Knowles who came up with the first one, wasn't it?
It may well have been.
So we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah. Awesome. Yes. Next one from Jesus. Hi, Jesus. Not a question, but a comment. Thanks for your presentation. I've followed a very similar path from reacting emotionally at work, ask the ex-events since I work with, to finding a framework for life in Stoicism. Thanks again for reminding us how philosophy can help us live a better personal and professional life.
No worries.
Great. The next one from Christian. Hi, Joe. As designers, we sometimes feel we could have done or pushed boundaries more. How do you think the Stoic approach can help us gain confidence in knowing how to strive for better outcomes and solutions?
So, sorry, can you read that again?
Sorry. As designers, we sometimes feel we could have done more or pushed boundaries more. How do you think the Stoic approach can help us gain confidence in knowing how to strive for better outcomes and solutions?
So how would Stoicism help you to gain confidence to strive for better outcomes and solutions? Again, on that one, I'm not totally sure. I think that would be something else I need to think about. You can gain a lot of confidence from, being comfortable with the way that you're acting, and if you believe that you're acting in the right way, so you're being virtuous and you're doing the things that you think are right, then you can gain a lot of confidence from that. But that's difficult. I don't necessarily know if that would give you confidence. Yeah, again, I'm sorry, I don't really have a good answer for that.
Cool again, Christian. feel feel free to hound Joe on LinkedIn.
Yeah, no, do because there's definitely a few things that yeah that I would like to think about a little bit more.
Awesome. It's a brilliant question next from John Bailey. If
Okay.
you had a tattoo to symbolise Stoicism and act as a daily reminder for yourself, what would that tattoo be?
Oh, that's a good question. There is some symbolism attached to Stoicism. I can't think off the top of my head. Would it be? I think if if I had to, if it was going to be, there are some symbols. I think there's some like Roman stuff. But I think if I was going to go for like words, you know, like let's say there's a huge number of quotes and things like that. It would definitely be one around, um, you know, being the best person I could be. In fact, I think I've seen someone with that tattoo. Which one is it? This one, or you know, or something to do with control. Possibly, and thinking about that to sort of remind myself of, because I think of all of the things that I've spoken about, it's the buckets about what you can control versus what you can't that I think is the most important thing. So I think it would be something, a symbol, if not the words, that would remind me of that every time I looked at it. I don't know where I'd put it, and I don't know if it would look very good, but that would be it.
Cool. Thank you, John. The final question from Nikos. Hi, Joe. How far should someone go to try and change and improve the UX of an interface when faced with obstacles? Which sounds like one that you might need a bit more detail on.
Yeah, maybe. I think when it comes to I think again it's about working out what you can change versus what you can't. If the changes on that UI are within your gift to change, then you should go as far as you think you should in order to deliver the best experience. But I think it's important to recognize what you can't do, and it might be that you can't change things for a number of reasons, you know, like politics, or might need to make a bit of a strategic decision about, okay, well, I've got to let this one go because and just accept that I can't make this change in order that I can perhaps do something else over the other side. So I think, yeah, it would depend a little bit, but again, it would be about what can I do versus what I can't do.
Brilliant, thanks, Joe. And then there's we just have one more from Kuntal. I feel like Stoicism prepares us to be a virtuous human being, which I think improves the experience with things that interact with us. We have a lot to discuss. See you on LinkedIn.
Okay, great. Good, because yeah, those two questions were very good, and actually overall, there's lots of really really interesting questions. And I guess the thing is, and the challenge for everyone, I think, is to, once you know a bit about Stoicism, is you take to these questions yourself and start to reflect and try and break them down and to really think yourself about how you can overcome and how you can answer those questions, and absolutely get in contact with me. So if I can help, I will.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks so much for presenting, Joe, and yeah, thank you to everyone that joined us today. If you did enjoy today, we are running a week-long festival of virtual events in lieu of Interact London, which sadly can't take place as a physical event this year. That's taking place between the 12th and the 16th of October. There's going to be 15 sessions in total, 3 per day. If you head over to at interact_CONF on Twitter or the Nomensa account, there's more details there. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.